Somebody likened me the other day to Jeffrey Epstein, which I didn't appreciate. There are parts of the world which are getting more out of their women than we are. If I'd been 27, 28 and a final year PhD student, would I have called it out?
Hello and welcome back to the Ocean News podcast. I'm Eva Cahill, the editorial assistant here at Oceanographic, and this week's Friday interview is our second in the series of Women in STEM interviews with PhD researcher Marianne Glascot. Marianne came to academia and life as a researcher later in her career, and her years working in male-dominated industries outside of marine STEM, including her experience working abroad, has given her a really interesting insight into how academia is actually functioning at the moment and where it can be improved. As you'll see, it also installed in her a confidence ready to take on some of the gendered prejudices within the field. There are actually some really nice parallels with last week's interview, which you should go and listen to if you haven't already, where similar themes are being picked up, but with generationally different outlooks and life experiences as well. I hope you enjoy it. Would you be able to talk me through your career and what you've done?
Well, I've worked in organisational development for many years, probably about getting on for 40 years. And I was working most recently in HSBC in foreign exchange. And we were doing a lot of work on sustainable development goals. And I was working with issues around climate change, but felt very much I was only a page ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you can hear some crunching noises, I've got 4 dogs and 2 of them are in the room. One of them's decided to eat a bone.
I can't hear anything, you're all good.
Okay, all right, so I apologise for slight crunching noises when you examine the audio on this. But yeah, anyway, so I felt like I was only a page ahead of anybody else. And we were making some quite big decisions that potentially could really affect people. So I packed my job in and went to do a master's in climate change at Sussex, University of Sussex. I had the option, I was offered a place at UCL, but because I'd got business experience, I didn't feel I needed their sort of more commercial, more finance orientated course, which is really, really good. Wasn't necessarily what I needed. So I went for the University of Sussex course, which was much more sort of developmentally orientated, which sort of suited me. And although it was in COVID, they carried on teaching face to face.
That's nice.
I had a really, really good experience. I loved it. And I fell back in love with science because I'd originally done environmental physics 1,000 years ago at Nottingham. So it sort of got me back into it. And I loved it so much, I wanted to carry on. So I've been doing a PhD following that. And I'm in my final year at the moment.
And so you spoke about your environmental physics with your undergraduate, is it? And then your graduate qualification. Obviously, those were quite some time apart. What was the women representation on the course like in both courses? How did you find your experience in both?
Well, the female representation was really strong in both. There was a good half my course back when I did environmental physics was women, which is quite surprising at the time. You know, physics has always struggled to attract women. But I was helped by, actually back in school, I was invited to Exeter University when I was 15 to do a physics Easter course, which really got me into the physics.
Yeah.
So all hail to Exeter, although I hated the hills. If you've ever been to Exeter University. So I wanted to stay in physics. It sold physics to me, but not traipsing up and down really steep hills every day.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, Nottingham, the campus at Nottingham where I was flat.
Yeah, I went to Birmingham, similarly, not too hilly.
Yeah, and it's surprising at that age those things matter.
Yeah, they do.
Us.
Especially when you to get yourself to a lecture.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the big differences, because I did my undergraduate degree, I finished in 86. So that was back in the day when I had problems with stalkers. You had casual sexism by lecturers, and you know, and so the culture has really shifted in a way, and I've been able to see that, and Sussex is probably, I mean, I don't know if there are universities still in the dark ages, but Sussex certainly isn't as a place for a female scientist to be. They're great.
Yeah. And then so from that, women who are in academia in STEM, they are sometimes even overrepresented at that university level, but then going leadership level that it's kind of falls off.
Yeah.
What's your kind of sense as to why that is, and have you experienced that or seen that?
I think the lack of security, financial security and job security, which is, I think, increasingly endemic in academia, is particularly hard for women. You know, if you've got family and children, I've got 3 sons, but by the time I came back, you know, I had 2 of them in their 20s. You know, my youngest is in his late teens. It, you know, if they get flu, it's not as bad as, you know, when they were 2 or 4 and things like that. But then I think some universities, and I can't speak for them, but certainly Sussex, it has creche facilities, it has a lot more support for women. But then I'm still, the last 6 months of my PhD, I've got no funding. I don't get a stipend for the last 6 months of my PhD. If you've got family and dependents, how are you supposed to manage with that?
The cat's just walked across the screen.
Yeah, so this is Berlioz, who's just walked in across my desk, which is a STEM hazard in this house. I have 3 cats, 4 dogs, and I've got sheep and chickens, which fortunately don't walk across my desk, but everybody else has a go.
Where was I before it?
Sorry.
We were talking about the conditions and being less conducive for women who have families that are working in academia and working your way up.
My experience of working, I mean, I've worked in male-dominated industries, you know, most of my life, and my impression is that women suffer from imposter syndrome much more so than men. And I think for women as well, in an environment where you don't get a lot of people telling you you're marvelous all the time and you are doing a good job and you are coping and your research is phenomenal and that sort of thing, it's very easy to doubt yourself. And you know, I like to think I have a lot of self-confidence and a lot of self-belief, but then I still had to demand my supervisor give me some positive feedback.
Yeah.
Because he would happily critique things and tell me what was wrong with them. And I actually turned around to him and said, would it kill you? Would it kill you to tell me something that I'd done well?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that I was speaking to another lady and she was saying about how like women often in spaces feel like they have to do something perfectly, and because they don't want to mess up the chance being a woman in that space. And is that kind of seems to echo with what you're saying about an imposter syndrome and the criticism within the field and things.
And you can get quite isolated, I think, particularly doing research. It's very easy to be sort of ploughing your own furrow and you suddenly look up and realise you haven't really spoken to anybody for a week. And my experience is that, you know, women thrive with other women around them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're quite good at building community and using that really positively to make action happen, really. And so what does this academic space feel like? I'd read some things about women being less likely to be published than men are, just statistically. Do you think that's a set of the conditions around academia, or is that something that's coming off crossing prejudices on paper?
Oh gosh, I mean, that's not my experience.
Okay, yeah.
I've just finished another 2 papers. I've just had one published. I've had a really good experience, but I don't know how isolated that is, and I certainly don't know how representative that is. There's still a lot of older white men around, but that's nothing necessarily against them. I mean, at Sussex in life sciences, we have a lot of senior women, so that's positive. But I think it's more the opportunity for team working and connection. I wish, you know, that could be stronger.
And so how do you feel that the sector, I guess we've kind of touched on it, but drawing from our conversation, how it could be improved and how we can get more women involved in the area and further higher up in leadership positions?
I think part of the challenge would be about job and financial security. So, you know, if women are doing a PhD, to suddenly face 6 months when you're supposed to be writing up where you have no stipend, you've got no financial cover, that's a big thing to face, and is financially difficult. To then go into a period where you're perhaps doing postdocs, where you've got a whole series where you've got no job security, you don't know how long it's going to last, you're going from job to job, where you geographically have to be very mobile, maybe dashing all over the world, which is tricky if you've got responsibilities for other people. An older generation, a next generation, you're caring for other people, and women are still more likely to be in that situation as primary carers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That echoes. So the first lady I spoke to, she'd had spent a longer time in the field, and she said like a kind of a similar thing, that the way that society's like structured, how we end up being like the main caregivers, means that it has this interaction with how the field is set up. And that, I mean, she's in Ireland, so it's like same sort of thing, but different country and everything. It's interesting to hear those similarities and experiences, I guess.
I think there are differences though in different countries. I've worked in China and the Far East, not in STEM. And there, in some countries, it is socially unacceptable for women, educated women, not to be working. And that makes for a very, very different culture. And it's quite liberating.
Okay, so like if you're an educated woman, you elect to stay at home as like a mum.
That's unacceptable.
Wow, I never knew that about.
You would employ somebody else to help with the care responsibilities, and you would contribute.
That is interesting.
So I still think we often kid ourselves in the UK about how far we've come. And when you go to other parts of the world where women truly are equals in the workplace, you feel the difference. And I certainly pick up on microaggressions when I come back to the UK, which then I'm much more sensitive to and drive me a bit insane. And so there are parts of the world which are getting more out of their women than we are as a result.
Can you think of any anecdotally of instances where you've just been so wound up, like something that sticks with you about feeling like you've been treated differently in the workplace as a woman?
Oh, well, historically, I mean, just comments about how you look, how you dress, how you're feeling, reactions to you being emotional.
My friend she worked for a company, I won't say what company, but she had to go and do a report about workers' conditions, and she came back and gave the report back and said the workers' conditions are like non-existent. She was told by her boss, "You're being too emotional in this." And she'd just done her job. And this was like last year. And I think that's often parts of the work that men don't necessarily see or understand, that those kind of microaggressions happen.
And sometimes a sort of a disrespecting of some things that often women can be better at. So I'm renowned for sort of very good, effective networking, which I would see as quite a good female trait. We tend to talk to each other and we make contacts and things. And somebody likened me the other day to Jeffrey Epstein, which I didn't appreciate.
No way. That's just completely flipping the power structure almost of your strengths. That's insane. So
we still have work to do.
I think there's also a level, like with that comment, it can be seen as a flippant comment, and it won't register. I think that's problematic to some people, because it's like it just is kind of drawing from pop culture and whatever. But actually, if you dig down into the heart of what Jeffrey Epstein did and abused that power structure, I find that really twisted.
Yeah, I mean, I called it out straight away.
Yeah, good on you.
But if I'd been 27, 28 and a final year PhD student, would I have called it out? Would I have had the life experience to confront that? So I do feel I have a responsibility to speak out about things that I observe, or because I feel I'm at a stage of life where I can confront that without fear that it's going to blight the rest of my life. And then I have to sort of stick up for my cohort and for people who perhaps don't feel they have that power to.
Do you feel like you have I don't know if it's an advantage is the right word, but coming into the field is slightly later and having had those experiences of working in male-dominated industries has given you like a resilience that you feel is useful as a woman?
Yes, and life skill, like just life skills. So just project management, IT skills. I feel like I have a whole host of skills that put me in a much stronger position. But I also feel that I'm seen as suspect by some people in academia for having worked in the enemy camp in industry.
Interesting.
But then I have a huge advantage in doing financial pitches, getting grants, talking to people in a broader range of industries.
Yeah, and if you came from that industry because you wanted to, you've seen what's actually happening, and you know then what gaps need to be filled in a sense.
Yes.
I think that's fair enough. I think that's a harsh judgment from people who think otherwise.
Academia should be and needs to be a broad church with a broad range of people and experiences for it to do its best. And I think increasingly we will get people in later life coming back into academia as people are living longer, healthier, and have the scope to do that financially. And I think that would be good for the sector.
And in terms of what you think women can bring to the workplace, and especially within STEM, within that broad church, do you think they have a viewpoint of scientific research that they can bring?
I think we have a real role to play in terms of breaking down barriers between disciplines. So my research is inherently interdisciplinary. It's some physics, it's some biochemistry and biology. And there are still, I think, real silos in the different areas of research, and yet some of the real breakthroughs, the real answers and the real breakthroughs are in that interdisciplinary work. And I think just in terms of challenging the status quo and working more flexibly across areas, I think we can really make a difference. There are lots of really, really effective and brilliant scientists working as technical supervisors, technical managers, research assistants who are doing, PhD plus quality work, who aren't necessarily getting recognised for it and aren't necessarily getting the qualifications to do it. And I think we could do a lot to sort of find those people and actually say, have you thought about doing your PhD and lecturing, or have you thought about teaching? I think there's a lot more we could do. Why
is that those people are working not? Is it because they don't feel?
I'm guessing. So you'd need to ask them, but I think there's probably something about the financial security of a job that pays every month. I think there is also probably something about self-belief and self-confidence. So I've come across women in those roles who don't think they have necessarily the first-class brain that allows them to potentially lead a research lab, and actually that's completely pants. They so could, and they would do it brilliantly. I think one of the challenges maybe, and what I don't know is if it's incredibly tough winning finances to support research. Everybody seems to agree that that's a really difficult thing. And what I don't know is what are the stats in terms of are male PIs more likely to win grant awards? Is there a bias towards men leading research activities that makes grant applications more successful? And do we need to do something about that? And I don't have the insight into that, but I question whether there is an issue there.
I might look into that as part of it. I wondered if you'd be able to offer 2 pieces of advice to, firstly, girls and women who are early in their careers in the field, and secondly, to men in the field and how they can make the space more accessible for women and more welcoming.
Good questions. I think so. To pick up on your first point about my advice to women would be try and find somebody in your life who can make you feel good about yourself in terms of that positive affirmation. We can do it. And a lot of what we do is inherently, it is quite hard. It does require thought and work. We aren't going to find it easy straight away, but it's that maintaining that self-belief that we can do this. So, whether it's a friend or in my case, a dog or a cat, but somebody who can help you just keep that self-belief that keeps you going and just moving forward. And don't worry about the risks. If I look at the people I went to university with all those years ago, most of them I would never have given a job to. A thoroughly disreputable bunch we all were at that time, but actually they all turned out pretty good. And so I think something is, don't worry too much about the future. Just do the best job you can with what you're doing today, and the future tends to sort of take care of itself. And I think with the men, I think, what would my advice be to the men? I think make a point of being sociable. Say hello to everybody. I think we just need to get everybody it's very easy in our environment to have your head down and just so focused on what you're doing that you don't look up and just say hello. And there's so much just really good collegiate work that comes out of just saying hello to somebody. So I would say always say good morning to everybody you see when you go in the morning, and that simple little one thing, and that's advice to men and the women, just makes such a difference.
Thanks for listening to this second interview in the series. Tune in next week to hear from zoologist Dr. Elvira de Ato, who has been in the marine STEM field for about 30 years now and gives a really long-term and encouraging perspective on women's advancements within the field.